Mr. Nosey by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Nosey lived to know about Mr. Nosey liked to know about everything that was going on. He was always poking his nose into other people's business. Mr. Nosey was the sort of person, if he came to a locked door, he simply had to look through the keyhole to see why the door was locked. Mr. Nosey was a sort of person, if he came to a letter, he simply had to open it to find out what it said. Mr. Nosey was the sort of person, if he was reading his newspaper in the train, he had to look at the other people's newspapers as well. Oh yes, Mr. Nosey is nosy by name and nosy by nature. In fact, Mr. Nosey wanted to know everything. Sometimes he used to look out of his window and see what all the people were doing. Nosy, Mr. Nosey! The people in Tiddletown, where he lived, did. And would that stop Mr. Nosey poking his nose? It did not. Mr. Nosey lived in a funny, tall house in a country called Tiddletown, which I told you. And the people of Tiddletown were really upset. Mr. Nosey didn't live to them really closely. He just goes out sometimes and just looks for nosy stuff. He's the nosiest person you ever likely to meet. We must do something about it, said Mr. Cleaner, which was the Tiddletown painter. That's right, said Mrs. Wasser, who was running the Tiddletown Wasser. He needs to be taught a lesson. If only we can do something to stop him poking his nose around, said Mr. Beat, the hammer man, and then he had an idea. Want to know what it was? Well, they just all gathered around and listened to his plan. The following morning, Mr. Nosey was out walking when he heard someone whistling. I wonder what's going on here, he thought, and it was coming from the door. Mr. Nosey opened the door, and splash went a bucket of plain paint right next on Mr. Nosey's nose. Oh dear, I'm sorry, said Mr. Bacon, who was just painting the wall and brought the bucket of paint on Mr. Nosey's nose. Where poor Mr. Nosey had to go home and take the paint off of his nose. He tried. The following day, Mr. Nosey was out. Then when he heard someone laughing, I wonder what's going on here, he thought to himself, and he just went up the bricks and snap went a bucket of clip on Mr. Nosey's nose. Sorry, dear, said Mrs. Water, who was the Tiddletown Water, washing some clothes, and just put one on Mr. Nosey's nose. And then Mr. Nosey paused the nose. He had to go home and take the clip off of his nose, which he tried again. The next day, Mr. Nosey was out, thinking to himself, I must not fall in one of these trees. But he'd keep disagreeing, but he couldn't decide when he heard someone humming. I wonder what's going on here, he thought to himself. He poked his nose behind the fence and bang went a hammer right on Mr. Nosey's nose. Oh dear, I'm sorry, said Mr. Clean, which he was hammering some wood. And then Mr. Nosey, poor Mr. Nosey had to go home and put a bandage on his nose, which he tried because he had with two swords, and he tried to put it. But when he did, the following day, Mr. Nosey was out again, walking in the woods, and then when he heard sword, I wonder what's going on here, he would thought to himself. He was just about to see what was going on with his nose when he remembered. He thought about it. I could tell what his thought was. Maybe I just cut, said Mr. Nosey. And he went on his way, not being very nosy, because if he did be nosy, then nosy, his nose, something bad might happen to his nose, and which he didn't do. When Mr. Nosey came out, not looking nosy, someone was watching him and laughed out loud. It was Mr. Aloud, sawing some wood like like the other man. And then he giggled, laughed aloud, and he chuckled, the plan has worked! And he rushed there to tell everyone that Mr. Nosey was not nosy anymore. And so from this day to that on, Mr. Nosey is not his nosy self. If you're nosy as Mr. Nosey used to be, you know what will happen to your nose. A sore nose!